from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're listening to the CISO Talk podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk.
Straight talk.
And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Happy November, folks. Thank you for tuning into the CISO Talk podcast. I am your host, James Azar. I've got a great episode today. But before we get started, if you have not subscribed to our podcast, do so right now. We are in the month of November, which means, yes, there's a presidential election going on as we're recording this. It's the day after, and we still don't know who's going to lead our nation. However, there is one thing for sure. It is Veteran November. And every single day at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I put out a new episode speaking to one of our veterans. So make sure you do subscribe and tune in and support those veterans. Make sure to comment on those episodes. Thank them for their service. They've done a lot. And now, without further ado, joining me today is Bob Turner. He's the Chief Information Security Officer over at the great University of Wisconsin. And since it's a Big Ten school, can we say the University of Wisconsin, like the Ohio State?
No, we just say go Badgers.
Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Let's get started talking a little bit about you. How did you get into information security? What's your background, and how long have you been doing cyber?
Well, so let's talk about information security in its purest form. That was my first exposure was when I joined the U.S. Navy. A mere 5 days after my 18th birthday, I found myself in boot camp. A couple of months there, learning how to walk and talk and wear different clothing, and then I went into Radium and A school, which is the kind of that foundational school, and that's where I was introduced to the concept of information security. The first thing, and let's talk about the things we do today. We make sure our files are in the right drawer, they're in the right space, they have the right markings on them, so we know what the data is. And I learned, right in the beginning that my best friend was that GSA approved safe with the XR7 lock, and that's how we secured the data. But then we also learned about data in transit, and we learned about cryptography, and we learned about how to, patch the systems up so they communicated. The three major things I think about in information security are the eternal triangle, and you're gonna bet that I'm gonna say CIA. Well, I'm gonna tell you no. It's the A that is important. It's availability. If I'm not patched up right, if that crypto is not synchronizing right, if I can't have, as a commanding officer of mine once said, if I can't pick up the radio, talk to the person on the other end, and they say exactly what I want them to say. If that happens, all I've done is broken even for the day. So it's availability, integrity, confidentiality. AIC is where I see the triangle at. If I'm going to lock the data in a drawer at the end of the day or put it in a secure file storage area at the end of the day, that's what I've done for the security part of it. But if a system is not there when the warfighter needs it, or when the business needs it, or when the academy needs it, or when a researcher needs it, I have failed in my job. I kind of went on in the following my initial training. I went into the Navy submarine force, had some great experiences. Deploying to a whole lot of really different locations, new locations for me. Kid from the eastern side of Washington State goes to Japan, Kenya, Somalia, the Gulf, Perth, Australia, Thailand, Hong Kong, all these other great, wonderful places that sailors get to go. And I was there to see it, and it was interesting. But every time we had something going on, there was always that security context behind it. What we were doing, the way we were conducting business, the data we were collecting, no matter how we collected it, that all had to be secured appropriately. And going on to that, to the age of the internet, and that was back in my experience, kind of the early to mid 90s when we started having things like Banyan networks. Banyan Vines was a popular network construct at the time. And then we suddenly realized that it was no longer, mainframe and video display terminal. It was my terminal had everything on it, and my terminal had to talk to another terminal somewhere else, or we had to start exchanging data via servers. Ooh, gee, what's a server? We had to learn all of that stuff. Working to protect the national defense and making sure that the information stay where it was supposed to stay was important, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to be in that part of the business. But it was also operating. We went some really cool places. We did a lot of cool things, but the greatest satisfaction I got was when we actually made the connection. We sat in a ship off the coast of Somalia, and we were able to pump data at high data rates back to the States so that we could have logistics support, or back to the people that needed it so they could process intel, or have that commercial satellite phone so families could connect when things happened. Loss of a family member, or just needing to make sure that they heard a voice. That was a cool thing about being a commo in the Navy in the 90s. From there, I retired after 2001, mid 2001, and I went on to work for the defense industry as a contractor consultant. Security was my big thing. Understanding risk, managing and assessing risk appropriately, and doing those unsavory chores of auditing and testing and making sure that what was there, and making sure that it was set up correctly. Did that for a while, and then all of a sudden an opportunity came up for me to come up to the Midwest to a research university that is basically a $3.5 billion a year enterprise, and help them build and manage and grow their cybersecurity program. Kind of in a nutshell, that's my career so far, and this has been one of the most exciting, one of the most fulfilling, one of the most satisfying parts of my career so far. I'm hoping to, continue on and continue doing great things, securing the information that is most important, and that's the stuff that makes people well again. That's the stuff that makes engines run faster, cleaner. That's the stuff that helps us understand the political landscape even better, helps us with business in general. That's the data I get to protect nowadays. I'm no longer worried about, ship position, troop strength, and all that kind of stuff. What I'm worried about is market position. I'm worried about where's the data going? How are we doing it better? Are we dealing with larger volumes of data quicker? I used to say bigger, better, faster, cheaper was the way that we had to think of everything that we do.
That's such a path. And one, thank you for your service. And in Veteran November, it's awesome to have veterans on the CISO Talk podcast beyond all the veterans I'm speaking with. So it's brilliant because this whole month, folks, every single chief information security officer on the show is a veteran. So I'm really happy that I've been able to dedicate the entire month of November from a content perspective all around our brave men and women who've served in our armed services. And so it's awesome to hear about your career in the Navy and kind of talking about information security from the very beginning and its concept of physical security, and now kind of in the digital cyber realm of it, and how it's not very much different than it was then.
Yeah, we're still putting files in drawers. And we're still making sure that connections are made so that we can talk back and forth. And, it's just a little different. Having the ability to see you face to face in real time and talk to you was sort of a pipe dream back then. But now it's real. And it's the way we do business. It's the natural state of being.
It was a Simpsons idea, wasn't it? Like the Simpsons kind of did an episode, I think in the 90s or early 2000s, where Lisa was talking on almost something that looked like at the time like a sidekick, if you all remember the old T-Mobile phones from a decade ago, and she was videoing with someone else, and so
it kind of goes back a little further than that. If you think about it, Star Trek. They had the face-to-face communications between the captains on the bridge of the starships. That was real. And of course now, modern day television, we've advanced a little bit since the 60s. We're talking about data wars in space. We're gonna steal your data. We're gonna, just looking at certain Star Trek movies that have gone past us in the past decade or so. The understanding the damage that can be done by misuse of circuitry, misuse of data, down to the little compact cards that they had, and they would stick them in, and that would be the entire operating program for the entire starship, contained on this little disk. Well, what are we doing with it now? I mean, we're talking about petabytes of data. I had somebody approach me about what would a terabyte network look like, and I'm just saying it's going to have to be fantastic.
So let's talk a little bit about leadership as we kind of go from background. We talk a lot, we hear a lot about, kind of workforce shortage in cyber and kind of the skill gap. But at the same time, when you're looking to onboard people onto your team, what's the X factor? What's the quality that you look for? That's kind of you can have experience, you can have the certs, you can have the degrees, but if you don't have this oomph, you probably won't get a job on my team.
If you're not curious, okay, and I think that the curiosity is the real motivator. If you don't want to find out why something happened, why did that server get taken down? Why did that data suddenly become unusable, unreadable? If you're not willing to pursue that to the logical end, you're probably not going to do well in our world. And on my team, I have some really great leaders who are innately curious. And every once in a while, I kind of poke them just a little bit. What do you think about that? Or how should we approach this particular routine? But it also requires that you have the ability to be organized. You can't just kind of go in, pardon the term, guns a-blazing. You have to go in with a strategy in mind. You have to go in thinking about proactive measures that are going to keep the data in the right place and available when it's needed. And if that's where you're at, then if we have an opening and you're otherwise technically qualified, you're on it. And that also includes, no matter what your background is, what your race, creed, gender, whatever. I want people who are curious, and I want people that are organized enough to be able to do the job right.
I love the curiosity aspect. We often talk a lot about passion, but curiosity is another. It's the technical term for passion. Right. Mm-hmm. It's very, I love that. That was such a great description. When we look at the role of a CISO today, we think of the silo of security that's been traditional in a lot of organizations. But CISOs today are really kind of heading across the entire enterprise. This morning I had a board meeting, for the company, and and I'm sitting there and talking to the board about security, and we're no longer talking in the siloed aspect of IT. We're talking emergency preparedness, post-COVID-19 plans, digital transformation, and cloud. There's a lot of different aspects where now security is a part of it, including, finance and the office of the CFO. And so I find myself that I'm now no longer siloed anymore. I'm kind of more on top, looking down at the org. I'm kind of not sitting in one side with a dotted line to someone in a dotted line. I'm almost sitting across right next to the CFO, looking down at the entire org. But what do you think is needed from a CISO in order to be successful, not only in leading the team, but also in being instrumental across the enterprise to win champions for the security program?
Yeah, I think you have to have that technical understanding. You don't have to be the one who sits on the firewall. I mean, it's been a number of years before I actually had the opportunity to set context in a firewall. I'm not a programmer. I don't play one on television, but I understand the value of secure coding. And when I talk about to the other directors that are my peers and frankly enablers. It's important that I understand that you don't have to be technical to do it all. And when you're talking to the rest of the university, you have to talk to them, the rest of the business, the rest of the organization you're the CISO for. You have to talk in the terms, hopefully, that they'll understand. And if they don't, then you have to help them understand. So I find it a portion of my time is trying to explain in terms that are useful for others so they can really understand. It's not just running a scan for the purpose of running a scan. It's running a scan to make sure that your system is ready to go and available and your data is not going to be corrupt at the end of the day. That's that A and the I in the AIC triangle, right? But it's also important that you help them understand the importance of security. There's been so many bumper stickers out there. Oh, security first, or make sure that you're keeping up on security. But it's really thinking about the data. I do have a sign in my office. It was given to me by the university's first chief data officer. Actually, the words were given to me, but my wife actually made the sign, and it's all about the data. If you think about our job, it is all about making sure the data is there. It's available when you need it. It's making sure that data hasn't been corrupted by somebody who's just planted a worm inside of the server. And there are still worms out there. And it's all about making sure that when the data is managed in an appropriate manner, that it will be there when you need it. And and it is all about the data. And I say that to myself an awful lot. I support the Data Governance Council at the university, who are doing some really great work trying to figure out how to appropriately manage and be not only stewards but trustees of the data. If you think about it, it's very rarely do we get to say it's all our data. Because we get it from multiple sources. We get it from people that are asking us to help figure out what that data really means. But we do have our own data. We have our original research. We have data that has been examined, and we come up with better conclusions, and that then becomes data that belongs to the university.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that if you start with that data first attitude, and when you're talking to others around the campus, and you acknowledge that, hey, it is their data, it's the campus's data, it's our data, and you try to help them understand that by following some basic protocols, your data can be there when you need it. Again, harping on the A, it's got to be available.
Yeah, there's an aspect to data, I think, that in academia and in research, the data is a really big aspect of security. Mm-hmm. And very interesting for me in enterprise, I've transitioned from data to finance. Meaning I've started talking a little bit more about financial cyber fraud. That tends to resonate a little bit more on the business side of the board. That's something I spoke about a lot today. Because typically when I talk about data, they go, okay, all right. And kind of they nod their heads. And the moment I said, financial cyber fraud, eyes opened.
Yes.
And they were like, oh, well, what does that mean? And, talking about business email compromise, talking about invoicing fraud, talking about payroll fraud, stuff that really has an impact. And that tends to resonate more with, again, I think with the business that resonates more in academia, the academia value, it's like security is it can never be McDonald's, right? It can never be a Chick-fil-A. It can never be a Burger King. It's never going to look the same. From place to place, it's going to be different. right?
Yeah.
It's different because your priorities is different. And at academia, you're trying to secure the research, that data from that research, the students' data, that's what's critical for a university to survive. That's the X factor of a school. And in business, for decades, we've been talking about data and information. And data and information make headlines, but they don't really break down the barrier of budgets. They don't really break down the barrier of adopting security across the enterprise and taking it out of a silo. But money does. Everyone understands, money. Everyone understands dollar value. And that seems to resonate a little bit better. I'm wondering if that's a real, to me, that would be a very cool kind of college research, is going a really cool thesis is to go to a bunch of board members and be like, let me speak to you in data terms, money terms, and business terms, and which one do you understand better? And what do you get out of each of those? Can you quantify risk based on these three approaches? Does that make sense?
It is, and kind of another part about it's all about the data. It's not what you say; it's what you can prove, and that's my team is trying to understand the metrics of cybersecurity as they apply in the higher education environment. What are the things that resonate? What are the metrics that matter? I've always maintained that my two primary metrics is the mean time to detect weirdness and the mean time to remediate the weirdness. And the closer together they are, the better off we're doing. There's a success story there when you can say, well, we found it inside of 2 hours. We remediated it at hour number 3.5. And by hour number 5, the system was back online.
Yeah.
We're rapidly approaching the opportunity where that has got to be, almost right together because of the way the adversaries are able to access and exfiltrate data or, manipulate data or, delete data. We have to be able to make sure that we're resilient in that. The value proposition, which resonates well, is understanding what it takes to recover. So a recent example was there was a research outfit that got a little bit of ransomware, and they obviously didn't pay the ransom, which was probably my best choice. But they understood that they didn't have a backup. And so now what are you going to do? So they have been busily reconstructing from other data sources to create the database they had before. Tremendously time sink and expensive to do because you've not only while you're doing that, you have to keep research going. You have to keep those projects in line. Just like students, when you are at crunch time before you're turning in that final paper, and all of a sudden you pressed the wrong key and you just deleted the only living version of your final report. You've got to go back and figure out how to reconstruct it. It is worth it, in my CISO opinion, to make sure you've invested in backup. You've invested in data backup. You've invested in system redundancy, where you have the freedom to do so and the resources to do so. If we could quantify all the costs of a total breach, and if we could do that and say, based on your initial indications, this one's going to cost you $1.6 million to fix, or this one's going to cost you, $80,000 in labor to fix, or this one's going to cost you, pick your favorite variable and the cost of doing business. If we could come in at the front of it and say, this could happen to you, here's what it would cost at the end of the day, then suddenly that, $127 piece of software doesn't seem so bad. It doesn't seem like a budget buster. It doesn't seem like that $9 per copy per student security software doesn't seem like a budget buster anymore.
Yeah, it's very interesting how you approach that. And given this kind of conversation, is that where you find yourself spending a lot of time as a CISO? Are you kind of looking at those? Are you getting to that granular level of the security program, or are you very much kind of more of a strategic point of view of the security program?
Yeah, so I went to a course a little while back, and the concept of staying strategic and proactive is really where I want to be right now. Yeah, it's fun to get down into the details. It's fun to examine the how the bits and the bytes are protected. Um, but I have some great people that are working with me and for me at the university, and they love getting down to the details because they know that I'm going to ask a question that's going to require at some point that they have that detail in their head. But it's also where is our time best spent? It's best spent thinking strategically. What is that next opportunity for shenanigans to happen in the network? And that's an official term, by the way, shenanigans. We also look for the conditions of weirdness, and that's another official Wisconsin term, conditions of weirdness, COW, cow. It makes sense, right?
Yep.
Understanding what the realm of the possible is, and understanding the kind of the cost of doing the business, it's important. That's a CISO trait that a lot of us master, and it is often appreciated when it comes in handy. So, for example, when you're able to show the cost differential between investing now in a particular security control or coming back in later after the breach, and you have to kind of patch it back up and shovel a little bit more money into it in order to make it helpful at the end of the day. And I'd rather have the barn door on a latch than have to close the barn door after the data's gone.
Yeah, that's 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 a good approach, right? That's a good Wisconsin term. I'd rather have the barn door.
The one thing I have learned also as a CISO is when I get down into the bits and the bytes and I get down into the technical, that's where the non-technical people that I do have to help understand what's going on. That's when the eyes roll back and glaze over, and they really would rather hear about it in terms that make sense to them. And I do spend a lot of my time trying to understand what their business is, how they do their business, and apply those same concepts. There's still that file drawer out there with the manila folder that you put all the classified stuff in, you stamp secret on it, put it in the file drawer, spin the lock.
Yeah, there's a ton of that, and in fact, I think we see that a lot with cloud databases today, right? A lot of organizations where they have DevOps spooling up these cloud servers, these databases, and throwing data up there for testing, and then everyone forgets to take it down and shred it, right? Like, I personally think that in DevOps we should put a picture of Richard Nixon and just be like, remember to Richard Nixon everything you do every night. Don't leave anything there, right? Just shred it, i.e. close it down, stick a password on it. So many times we do a cloud audit, and I find, they've put up 7 environments over the last 3 days. And then you call them and you go, hey, what's up with those? Oh, they're test environments. Was there any real data there? Yeah, well, why aren't they password protected? Well, no one's going to find it, and I'm like, really? We found it.
How often do you go in and hear, well, it's just a test environment. It's okay. We don't need it available beyond the test. Well, if it's not there to conduct a test, that's the problem. If it is using any facsimile of live data, that's the problem. And to go into a test and not test the data protection requirements, either by contract or by law, or simply by just what is best practice in the industry, that's the ones that scare me probably a little more than others.
Yeah, the idea of the construct of data and I don't want to say the dismissiveness of some, the business has a business goal. Their DevOps, engineering, architecture, they're trying to meet a business goal, a deadline. They're trying to develop a software, a product. They're solving a problem for a client. I get that. And I don't dismiss what they do, and I don't belittle their work. Their work is extremely challenging. And it encompasses a lot of different aspects, and it rubs elbows with so many different departments and so many different business units within an organization. It's the idea of testing and Q&A. The idea of testing and Q&A to me is extremely fascinating from a security perspective, because that's where we see a lot of the kind of, Twitter messages or LinkedIn messages that we get. I found, this data sitting somewhere out there. And when you go and you look it up or you talk to someone, it's Q&A data, it's testing data. And some of it is, well, there's nothing in there that's PII. It's just names and email addresses. And I'm like, that's the definition of PII. That's
of
literally
real people?
the definition.
I mean, if they had, the G.I. Joe character dolls, if they had those names in there, if they had just, random John Smiths and Joe Jones kind of names in there, that would be one thing. But when they're actually using representative data, which I agree that there is a need to make sure that to get that test to be complete, you have to have real data, but you also have to understand that that is a test environment. And once you're done with that test, you probably need to do something else with the data rather than leaving it online for others to discover later, because guaranteed, and as well as I do, that if the data is there and the system is not paid attention to, the data will not be there, or copies of it will start appearing on the dark web.
Yeah. Or you lose business because of it. Because your customers...
That's the impact, right?
Right? Because your customers... your client, the person who you're working for, the company who you're doing business with, has a more mature cyber program that finds this database as part of their due diligence, as part of their work, as part of the different vendors they use, and it impacts them just as much as it impacts you, and then your business case goes out the door. And there's an aspect to that where when we talk about security, often in the office of the CISO, I find that we need to start kind of looking at how do we bridge that gap. It's funny, I whenever I do vendor calls, I always ask them in the request for a meeting, tell me 2 things you do different or better than someone else, and tell me how you solve those problems. And if I like what you write, I'll take the meeting, and if not, then I won't.
That's one of the things that CISO has to do is be a leader, and that is also setting up those conditions of how valuable is your time. I do talk to an awful lot of vendors who have that next cool tool that is obviously going to save me from digital Armageddon. My current amount of unread, unsolicited emails is in my inbox is 20,614. I say that because I have to understand the volume of information that's coming at me, and I actually did a little bit of deep analysis on that, and probably 94 to 96% of those 20,000 are emails from somebody who saw the word CISO in my title and said, "Oh, I've got to let him know about this new tool, this new wonderful thing." We're dealing in an age where budgets are strained. Budgets are strained because of revenue loss. Budgets are strained because of drop-offs in enrollment, or budgets are strained because of just those other economic factors that we all have to live with.
Right. I mean, expenses have gone up. If a university wants to bring students, even if nothing changed, let's say none of the data changed, right? And sorry to cut you off there. I'll promise, Bob, I'll give you back your thought. But I think you brought up something really important, which is a lot of times that's not really considered, which is in the era of COVID, yes, my business may be doing better, but my cost of doing business has increased.
Yes.
And so my margins might be lower.
Yeah, well, and it's that overall quality of business. And I think kind of where I go on that is for every vendor who asks for 5 minutes of my time, and like I said, 20,000 some odd unread, and every one of them wants 5, 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes of my time. It comes to a point where, and this has been a rant of mine on certain business social media, that it comes a point where I really have to do my job. And my job is not necessarily answering every email that comes across my desk, but my job is to understand the ones that matter.
Right.
And the people I need to talk to are mainly my constituents, because they're the ones that depend on me to make sure my team is in place doing the job that they do so very well, and they're there for the university. But I also have to make time to listen to the good ideas. I have a kind of a laundry list of things that I would like to look for. My team and I have discussed this a lot. And if one of those comes across, I'm going to take the time to listen, because, even though budgets are constrained, we still have that strategic focus. We have to be thinking beyond the normal after next. And I'm using that specifically because that happens to be part of the title of the paper that I have written. But it's also understanding, what is necessary in order to continue advancing the state of cybersecurity with my organization. Every CISO in the world thinks that. Every CISO in the world has that as one of their driving factors. And, every one of us are trying to look out for the best interests of our organization, our clients, the third parties that we do business with. All of that adds up to that risk equation, likelihood and impact. If I am trying to reduce likelihood and impact, I'm doing the right thing, because we all know math is math, right? Likelihood and impact go down, then that means risk changes as well. And risk that is managed appropriately involves making sure that you're being the leader, and you're understanding risk, and you're helping people to understand how they can mitigate or remediate totally the risk.
Yeah, that's a great point with the idea of remediating risk and stretching budgets around your risk. Sometimes, with COVID, we saw a whole new set of risks pop in our environments that we really weren't prepared for. Not because we didn't see it to be necessary, but because we never felt it was needed, right? Who would have thought that 100% of your people are going to work from home and use their home routers, and some of them would use their own devices? Who would have thought of COVID being what we're going through right now? It's fascinating. I've seen a lot of messages over the last month or so from people who come up with these new technologies and some of these vendors, and they're like, well, we've got the perfect COVID product to help you keep your people safe while they're working from home and all that stuff. And I look at that and I go, well, that's interesting, but at the same time, we've already done all of our workarounds, and we kind of know what we're doing. It's 7 months later. COVID's like, I've added COVID to my filter, to my email filter, to my spam folder. If an email comes in with COVID on it, it's going right there. And unless it's coming from an address, so maybe the chancellor is sending out her latest message on how to deal with COVID in our current environment. Those are the ones I tend to not want to screen off. But you're right. People that are playing on the pandemic still after these many months, they're not looking for the new normal. And that's where we have to be looking ourselves. We have to, again, say it 20 times a day at least. We have to be strategic. We have to think about where we're headed. Otherwise, we're just being tactical and reactive. And tactical and reactive is fun because it earns you quick points, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem at the end of the day. Tactical and reactive is putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Yeah, it's very. Putting a Band-Aid over an open wound is a great description. I think the other part of it is being sensitive to what we're going through at the moment, because business hasn't stopped. Life hasn't stopped. We've changed the way we do business. We've changed the way we live slightly because of this pandemic. But at the same time, we still have goals. We still have KPIs we need to meet. We still have budgets we have to hold to. And when they start cutting your budget, the last thing I want to do is cut my HR budget or my team budget. My team budget is cutting their wage or losing 2 or 3 people is going to cost me a lot more money than dumping technology or withholding technology and increasing controls in place. Right. I can always add technology. I can't always find great people.
You can always maintain your vigilance, though. And that's the thing that the best mix is one that involves people, processes, and technology.
Right.
And I would say that, processes and technology are probably the two that are the most rewarding because they give you an instant fix. But they don't necessarily solve the problem, because I don't know of a router yet that can think its way out of a fire. I don't know of a database server that can think its way out of a flood because the data center had a leak. I don't know of a laptop that can withstand a 3-year-old finding out that it's not in fact a Frisbee.
Or it's not something you throw on the floor because you didn't get apple juice.
Haven't had that one happen yet, but I can see it happening. But it's also, what happens when I put the data in the wrong place and I go back to pull it out of that wrong place and find out that it's already locked up.
Yeah,
it's gone. It's history. It is irretrievable to me unless I pay somebody a lot of money in Bitcoin. It is also, not anticipating that whether we like it or not, Christmas is going to happen. Whether we like it or not, Thanksgiving is going to happen. Whether we like it or not, we're going to have to take that time and put ourselves in a position where if we're not paying attention to the exigencies of the moment, that we're going to let something bad happen. And it's going to happen during one of those times when we're intentionally drawing our attention elsewhere. So when you think about the normal battle rhythm, there I go, back into my military days, the normal rhythm of the work cycle. If I'm waiting to patch because there's something else that is going on that I think is more important, I am rolling the dice.
Yeah.
I'm rolling the dice that it's not going to be exploited. If I'm watching my intel sources like I should, as a cyber leader, and understanding what the potential shenanigans that are sitting around out there might be, and I'm not thinking about how do I avoid them, or how do I patch to protect myself against them, or how do I implement a different methodology for testing, that's when the weirdness is going to happen. That's when the shenanigans prevail, and that's when we're going to be sitting there holding our hands and saying, didn't expect that.
Yeah, I find security controls sometimes, and being vigilant and having visibility is a lot of times I find to be sometimes a bit more effective than the shiny box or the shiny tool, because it keeps us grounded, and it keeps us sharp. And I feel like tools a lot of times create an alert fatigue. They create a level of complacency. I've seen that in a lot of SOCs. I've seen that in a lot of fusion centers that I where I speak to other of our peers, and they talk about the alert fatigue and the complacency of reliancy. Is that even a word? I don't know.
I'll take the extra E off the end of it, and we'll just call it reliance. How's that?
Yeah, the reliance on technology, or the reliance on tool to do the work for you, and thinking that the tool is 100% right all the time. And sometimes I like the idea of just stripping those tools for a little while and getting the team back sharp, kind of looking at it with 2 eyes, seeing what's happening, and then reconfiguring the tool, because that gives them an opportunity to improve the initial configuration. Because like all things in life, attacks and offense evolve. Like the COVID evolved, like the viruses evolve, like malware evolves, like ransom. But you know what's not evolving is our reliance on tools. And once we configure them once, we never go back and look at those configuration. Or we set it to do it 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road. And when we do it, we go, well, there's nothing here. It's okay, until the day where you go to access a file and you can't unless you pay, Bitcoins.
Well, and so I totally agree with that. But let's take it from a different perspective. When you can automate a process, or you can automate what is already a tool output. So, for example, when you have your vulnerability scanning tool also taking off asset ID data or asset information about the device on the end. When you're automating the way that data is collected, the way it is put into your configuration management structure, whatever it is, and then you automate the way that you're told when things change, that's good automation, because that takes that moving the information from file folder A and putting it in file folder B, closing the safe and spinning the lock. That takes that to a level where you don't have to say, when was the last time I inventoried? That's part of a dashboard. That's a report that you get. You can automate the collection and display of information. You can pull that cool graph out of your Advanced Threat Protection Suite's GUI, and you can automatically put that into something like Smartsheet. And I'm not a product advertisement, but it's just understanding that there are tools that can take that data and that can actually help you better display and better understand what is going on in your environment. From a leadership perspective, my investments in tools and processes and in people to understand how to do those routines, that's money well spent.
Right.
And I will tell you that no tool out of the box is the perfect tool. The tool has to be tuned. The tool has to be made to understand your environment. If I don't take the time to do that, I've just put a new tool on there that probably has some real great value, real great capability, but I will never know what it is until I get in there and understand it and have somebody help me automate the functions of that tool so that they work with the rest of the tools in our kit.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we're almost out of time. I want to ask you one more question, and then we're going to go into our CISO Insight round.
Okay.
What are you seeing us do in security that we're getting really better at, like an old problem that we're on the brinks of solving it, maybe through automation, as you were just mentioning, or something like that? Are you seeing something where you go, there's light at the end of this tunnel, we're going to get through this tunnel, and we'll probably be able to mitigate this specific threat vector or this specific risk or anything of that nature within cyber?
Yeah, I think your mileage will vary depending on the industry you're in and sort of the approach you take to security at your where you're at, where your office is. But the thing I think that we're getting a lot better at is understanding that nexus between intelligence and action. I think that we've got a lot more resources available to us now that are telling us, the condition of exploits. We seem to be getting a lot faster for the manufacturers reporting, hey, we found this bug. We've now got a patch for it. Let's go ahead and install it. But what we haven't done necessarily is had our local processes keep up with that. So, the time from exploit occurring to a mitigation that is discovered and to a patch that is available, that's the area where I think that if we're working to make that work close together, then we're going back to that magic metric I said: mean time to remediate, mean time to detect, and mean time to remediate. That's where we need to be at, and I think that we're getting better at that. We're getting really good at taking the intel and trying to bring those two as close together as possible. we have a ways to go, obviously, because in a perfectly round world where Bob's the king for the day, we already know this stuff, and we already know the exploits there. We already know where the patch is, and we have it using security orchestration and remediation technology. It's automatically patching. But the world is an oblate spheroid, and I, in fact, am not king, so I have to do what I have to do to make sure that that we're at least advancing in that direction. Again, strategic and proactive.
Go. We got me again? Great. Sounds good, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it sounds a little rough.
Give me just a moment here. Awful mistake of bumping the cord. How about now? Is it still rough?
It's calming down. It's calming down.
Great. Let me...
Don't breathe. For the rest of the segment, don't breathe.
Don't breathe. My face, my lack of sleep over the last 2 days and everything going on. Folks, we're going to go to the favorite part of the podcast, the CISO Insight Round. I hope you're ready to go on the hot seat, Bob.
Okay.
Very difficult questions coming your way. I have a buzzword graveyard, and if you could throw any buzzword in that graveyard, what word would that be?
Value added.
That's a first. I've now have to dig 2 holes in my graveyard this month simply because 2 people have given me new words.
There you go.
So here we go. What's one technology that'll change the way we do cyber?
SOAR technology. Far and above everything that automates and remediates. That's where we need to have.
Brilliant. What's the last book you read?
Sanger's A Perfect Weapon.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the cyber canon. If you're familiar with it, I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, very familiar with it. What's the last movie you saw?
All the way through. I have to admit it was the last one of the Star Wars where Mark Hamill was a lot older.
I actually the last movie I saw was The Social Dilemma, and I've seen it maybe 3 or 4 times on Netflix, and the reason I've seen it so many times is it's an amazing documentary. It's a great film, and it's highlighting some of the threats of social media, but it's also one of the interesting things that I take from that film, and I urge everyone to kind of give it a watch, is watch how they talk about AI, the social media engineers, the whistleblowers that came on that documentary.
I'll put that one on my list.
It's fascinating. I think you'd really enjoy it. Also, The Perfect Weapon on HBO is a great documentary.
Good.
Another great one. What's your favorite music?
I'm a big fan of Christian modern rock.
Okay, so like Third Day and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
I really like For King and Country as well.
Okay, brilliant. So we wrap up, and I want to ask you, what's one thing you took away from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The value of doing pandemic tabletops. We actually did one in the fall of 19. And I am still mystified as exactly how we settled on pandemic for the topic, but we actually walked through that fall everything that we ended up doing in March. And it was awesome.
They're like, Bob, how did you predict this? And you're like,
I didn't predict it. I didn't choose it. It was actually our deputy CIO said, okay, let's do this one. And it was just amazing. All of the things that we had to think about, all of the conditions that had to be set, all the contacts that had to be made. We nailed it. And that's, I'm bragging about the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We went from Wednesday to Friday, and by the next week was spring break. So by the following Monday, we had taken 37 cores and brought them from in-class delivery to the ability to deliver online.
I love that. That's such a great like little piece of nugget here. Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really grateful that you took time out of your day to be with us. I know you're, day after the election, most people are hiding in their bunkers, waiting for whatever's supposed to happen. The zombie apocalypse is what I've been, if you spend any time on Twitter, in the last few days, if you spend any time on Twitter, you feel like it's doomsday. Like you're waiting for the alien ships to come through like Independence Day and just start blowing shit up.
I also know that we have survived contentious elections in the past. Ever since our founding, we have gone through the ebbs and flows. We almost broke ourselves in half back in the 1860s. We survived. We'll grow. Whatever happens next, all we have to do is just keep our heads about us. The famous quote, just keep calm and carry on.
Keep calm, carry on. Most importantly, our country's run by Congress and Senate, not by president, technically speaking.
That's right.
Know your Constitution, read the Federalist Papers, understand what our founding fathers intended for. Balance of power is really that the legislative branches do this, and the presidency is more around foreign policy and ensuring that none of our rights are infringed upon. I think if we understand that, then maybe we take value away from presidency. We've elevated presidents to kings, the do-all, be-all, when really we should hold and we've ignored the branch that we should be holding accountable, which is our congressmen and women and our senators. That's right. So just keep that in mind, folks.
It is the 545 federal employees that we have to keep our watch on, because the other 300 million of us have work to do.
Yep. We've got an economy to build. We've got kids to educate.
We've got experiences to have. We've got books to read. We have movies to watch, and we have just the whole world in front of us. And I think eternal optimism is also part of our nature and our being, and it has to be. I am optimistic that as long as I focus on strategy and proactivity, my team is going to do great. I have eternal optimism that tells me that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. It would have to take something really cataclysmic to prevent that from happening, wouldn't it?
The sun is always going to rise tomorrow, even in its darkest. Bob, again, I know you have to drop off here in just a minute, so I want to be respectful and mindful of your time. I can talk to you forever, and you're an amazing guest, and you have an open ticket. Whenever you want to come and talk on the show, all you have to do is just say, James, let's get together. Thank you for serving our nation. This is Veteran November, folks, so just make sure you tune in every day, Sunday through Friday. Take the Sabbath off, enjoy it with your family, listen to some music, read a book, go for a hike. The sun will shine also tomorrow. More veterans every single day on the CISO Talk podcast. This is our full CISO interviews, but every single day, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Another veteran talking about his journey in the service and serving our nation to InfoSec. That's it for us here today, folks. Bob Turner, CISO over at the University of Wisconsin, a state that a lot of eyes are watching as we record this right now. Until next time, folks, next week, Gary Hayslip will be joining me, the legendary Gary.
One of my
Hayslip.
Heroes.
He is. It'll be our Veterans Day episode, so make sure you tune in to that. Gary and I have an amazing discussion, and he shows off his Star Wars collection, so we get to geek out a little bit on that podcast. Until then, folks, my name is James Azar. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast. We'll be back with more tomorrow with another Veteran November episode. Until then, stay healthy, folks. Stay sane, and the sun will shine tomorrow. The wise words of Bob. And most importantly, don't click the link and stay cyber safe.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.